called a beam splitter. We want to do this with hidden variables, and we want to do it locally, so no action at a distance. The hidden variables are usually called lambda. So we'll say if lambda is 1, then the photon goes that way. If lambda is 3, then it goes the other way. Why 3 and not 2? Because I know what's coming next and you don't. Now we put 2 mirrors here and here so that the photons don't run off our screen, and another 2 semi-transparent plates there. Okay, so now we have 4 different paths, each with 25% probability. We'll give those the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we'll combine these 2 paths by directing both towards the same beam splitter. If our hidden variable explanation was correct, then we should get half of the photons here in detector A and half here in detector B. But this isn't what happens. Indeed, you have probably noticed that this setup is what's called a Mach-Sender interferometer. If the paths are the same length, then the photon will always go to detector B. You can measure it and all, it's definitely real. The interference in these detectors is exquisitely sensitive to the length of the paths, which is why one can use this type of interferometer to measure tiny deformations. This is how a gravitational wave interferometer works. But how does it work? Well, in quantum mechanics, the photon is described by a wave function, and waves can interfere with themselves, either constructively or destructively. In quantum mechanics, the photon goes over both paths, and on this output, the wave interferes destructively with itself, so no signal, and all photons go the other way. But the price you have to pay for this is that if you measure which path the photon went, you need the non-local collapse. How can we use hidden variables to get this done locally? Well, no one's ever said that we can't have waves that go 2 paths in a local hidden variable model. All we need to do is say, if we measure which path the photon goes, then we use these variables, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the photon behaves like a particle. If we measure the interference between the paths, then that's hidden variable number 5. The photon behaves like a wave and goes only into detector B. Problem solved. It's local because the photon goes on one continuous path into the detector where it's measured. For this to work, the value of the hidden variable that determines what the photon does must depend on what you measure. It's called a violation of measurement independence. So the lesson is, if we want a local hidden variable model that reproduces quantum mechanics correctly, then it needs to violate measurement independence. This finally brings us to Bell's theorem. I'm not going to explain Bell's theorem because you've already watched 20 videos about it and it didn't help. I'll just tell you what it says. Bell's theorem says if you want a local hidden variables model that reproduces quantum mechanics correctly, then it needs to violate measurement independence. Isn't that what we just concluded from this little example with the interferometer? Yes, Bell's theorem says the same thing. You see, what happened is that Bell originally just assumed that measurement independence is fulfilled. He then proved that any local hidden variables theory which fulfills this assumption will obey an inequality for the correlations of certain measurement outcomes. It's now called Bell's inequality. Quantum mechanics can violate this inequality. What the Nobel Prize was awarded for is experimentally demonstrating that these inequalities are indeed violated by observed measurement outcomes. This means that either reality respects measurement independence but is not locally causal, or it's locally causal and violates measurement independence. Just logically, it could be a combination of both, but I don't know why you'd want to do that. Since Bell had forgotten about this assumption of measurement independence, he mistakenly thought that demonstrating an experimental violation of his inequality would rule out all local hidden variables models and thereby show that spooky action at a distance is real. Indeed, most physicists still seem to believe this. At this point, you might think Sabine is talking complete rubbish, because if that's right, why doesn't anyone ever mention this? Well, first of all, you don't have to take my word for it. It's all in the published literature and easy to check. In fact, one of the people who pointed out that Bell had forgotten this assumption was John Clauser, who was one of the recipients of the 2022 Nobel Prize. Why physicists refuse to mention it is a very interesting question to which I don't have an answer. My best guess is that they want reality to be weird because they like the mystery. There are several hidden variables models that are local and that reproduce the predictions of quantum mechanics by violating measurement independence. I'll leave you links in the info below. And yes, a violation of measurement independence has also been called superdeterminism, though this term is extremely misleading. I talked about this in an earlier video. In summary, quantum mechanics is not local. What makes it non-local is the collapse of the wave function. The question is whether this non-locality is physically real. If the collapse of the wave function was a physical process, it would be what Einstein called a spooky action at a distance, and reality would be non-local. It has not been shown that this is indeed the case, no matter how many headlines say otherwise. Entanglement is a non-local correlation that can stretch over long distances, but it's not what Einstein meant by action at a distance because there's no action in it. If you're a fan of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics,
We also lost like 6 10v10 matches on Moist. The night before, wait. 2 nights ago. Merc, go Merc, go Merc, go Merc, go Merc, go Merc. Let's see first one. Love you, bro.
Well done, Drew.
You probably took issue with some things I said, but this video is already too long, so I'll talk about this some other time. If you want to hear me complain about many words, don't forget to subscribe. Yes, I admit there's a lot going on in this video that I only touched on very briefly. What is a wave function? How do you get probabilities out of it? How does interference work, and why is it important? If you want to understand this in more depth, you can do this with my course on quantum mechanics at brilliant.org, who have been sponsoring this video. Brilliant offers courses on a large variety of subjects in science and mathematics. The great thing about their courses is that they're all interactive with visualizations and follow-up questions, so you can check your understanding right away. This is why I like to look things up on Brilliant. It's fast, it's easy, and it tells me what I need to know. My course on quantum mechanics gives you an introduction to interference, superpositions and entanglement, the uncertainty principle, and Bell's theorem. It begins from the very basics, so you don't need to bring any background knowledge. And after that, you can continue maybe with their course on quantum objects or quantum computing, or wherever your curiosity drives you. If you're interested in trying Brilliant out, use our link brilliant.org/Sabine and sign up for a free trial where you'll get to try out everything Brilliant has to offer for 30 days. The first 200 subscribers using this link will also get 20% off the annual premium subscription. Thanks for watching. See you next week.
Hey everybody, my name is Katie Morton and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and today I'm going to walk you through the 10 signs of quiet borderline personality disorder, otherwise known as BPD, and 6 ways that we can better manage it. And if you like videos like this, make sure you like and subscribe. It really does help. But let's jump into today's topic. When people talk about BPD, they often talk about the outward expressions of it. Things like us being impulsive or difficulties in relationships. We can get really upset easily, we can lash out, we can pick fights, we can also self-injure, and just do a lot of things that people can see in outward expressions. When people talk about BPD, they often talk about the outward expressions of it. These can be things like us being really impulsive, splitting behavior, which means that we can see people as all good or all bad. We can also lash out and be really emotionally volatile. That's what a lot of people reference. However, what most people don't talk about are the quiet symptoms of BPD. These can be things like self-injurious behavior, deep depression, struggle with self-worth. And that is what we're going to talk about today, the more quiet signs of BPD. And before we get started today, just know that we are building a studio outside of our house. And so if you hear some nail gunning and compressors going, that's because the building is happening. It's very exciting, but it's also incredibly noisy. Okay, with that, let's jump into the 10 signs of quiet borderline. And the first, referencing my notes, is feeling empty, alone, or numb a lot of the time. And that kind of disconnection between what I call like our brain and body. That numbness means that even if we are experiencing things in life, we're completely cut off. And in my experience with patients with BPD, this cutoff happens because we feel so much so intensely. One of my favorite ways to describe BPD is as us being emotional burn victims, meaning like if you think of a burn, any slight touch, oh, it hurts, right? And it sends through all our nerves. And think of that when it comes to emotions, that any slight, any upset, any pain that someone could cause us emotionally or that we experience is felt maybe 10 times what a normal person feels. And so we numb out, we disconnect because, frankly, it feels better and a lot safer. Okay? Number 2. And sign number 2 is we can feel like we don't exist or like we don't really know who we are. And I think a lot of that can come from this disconnection or this numb out. But if we think about it, when we struggle with borderline personality disorder, we fear abandonment so intensely that we can people please, we can do a lot of other things to ensure people are around us and that they're there all the time. And that kind of behavior can mean that we're looking outward for a lot of our needs and not looking inward. So we might not really know who we are. We might not have taken the time to get to know ourselves or to connect with what's really going on. And also you can see this connection with dissociation. I know a lot of my patients with BPD also dissociate. And if we are removed from our reality at least a little bit, right, to protect us from what's happening, we can struggle to feel like we exist because frankly, we're kind of pulled out of it. This video is sponsored by Fabulous, the #1 self-care app to help you better build habits and achieve your goals. It's based on behavioral science and breaks down science-backed daily routines into smaller steps so that they are achievable, and most importantly, something that we can stick to. It helps you learn to create rituals that help propel you toward your goals and participate in challenges that will build motivation and awareness along the way. From the start, I love the letters from future Katie telling me that I had already made some positive change. It kind of stopped my mind from jumping right into that negative thought spiral, like you can't do this, it's not going to work out. And it kind of reminds me of this therapy style called solution-focused therapy, which I have always enjoyed. You can pick from among more than 100 recommended habits already in the app, or you can create your own. And I love that I can set reminders, so it makes creating these new habits so much easier. Like the first of the foundation habits is to get me to drink water first thing in the morning. And to make that uncomplicated, the app reminds me to put water by my bed when I go to sleep. So it's right there when I wake up. I found that the app helped a lot with my overall well-being too. Because in addition to helping me form some new healthier habits, it also helps with wellness goals throughout the journey section. There were letters that I could read that made me consider my choices and goals. And then it would ask me to commit to one positive action that week. Overall, it's been incredibly helpful and motivating. It's great to see my progress and to be reminded to stick with my new healthier routine. Use the Fabulous app to start building your ideal daily routine. The first 100 people who click on the link will get 25% off of a Fabulous subscription. The third sign of quiet borderline is passive-aggressive behavior. If you're wondering what this can look like, this can be like me running late so that then you're running late to get to that appointment or to get to the airport or something like that. Maybe it's a subtle dig, what I call like a complisult, which is like a compliment that wraps over an insult that's saying like, oh, you look so nice today, way better than yesterday. And you're like, I'm complimented, but I'm also offended simultaneously. Or I can say, I'm fine, like when I'm not. That could be passive-aggressive behavior. We could also, referencing my notes, be sarcastic. Ooh, purposeful ignorance. This is one that I think is really important to remember, is when someone pretends that they don't know how to do something or that they don't remember as a way of kind of making you feel, it's almost like gaslighting. Like, oh, I don't think that's how it happened. I just don't remember. And that's kind of done as a way to invalidate your experience. Or I don't know how to run the vacuum, let's say, so then you do all the housekeeping. There can be a lot of these passive-aggressive ways that we interact when we struggle with quiet borderline. Okay. Sign number 4 is turning our anger inward. So it's like I'm trying to tell you that I'm upset without actually telling you. And all of these subtle signs that I give off aren't actual clear communication. And this is just another passive way that we can tell people that we're upset without really telling them. Sign number 5, impulsive behaviors. And this is very common, honestly, with all of my patients with BPD, but these are things like shopping, like overspending. We can engage in risky sexual behaviors, use illicit drugs, we can self-injure, we can binge eat. There can be a lot of different things that we can do impulsively. And impulsive really just means that we're not giving it any thought or really time to make a decision. We're just acting quickly. I think all of my patients who've had BPD over the years would agree that they have engaged at one time or another in these impulsive acts. Sign number 6 is that we have an intense fear of rejection. And when we have this intense of a fear, we can act out like a people pleaser, right? We can fawn all over people, doing things to ensure that they're happy, really, so that they don't leave us. And I've talked about this before, but often we think of people pleasing as a way of being really nice to everybody else. And there is that component to it. However, it's actually a manipulation tactic. We please others as a way to soothe our own system. And that goes for those of us with quiet borderline, right? We are so worried that people are going to reject us or abandon us that we do everything in our power to make sure that they stay around and that they're happy and we don't have any conflict. Sign number 7 is we can struggle with isolation. Often when we're so worried that people are going to leave us, reject us, abandon us, we can feel that it's safer to just be alone. Also, if we have a lot of emotional reactivity, right, and being around other people just makes our self-worth, go farther down, or we can feel like maybe I don't even really exist on a deeper level. It can kind of like exacerbate our BPD symptoms. We're not going to want to be around people. We're not going to want to put ourselves in situations that will only make us feel worse. And so we can think being isolated is the only way to be safe and to feel okay. Sign number 8 is splitting behavior. And I've talked about this a little bit, but splitting is when people are all good or all bad. And because those of us with BPD are emotional burn victims, that's the way I like to describe it, meaning that any small slight that can happen to us, we feel it very intensely, and then we can react out of it, right? And those other symptoms I was talking about, like impulsive behavior. So what splitting is, when someone in our life we think is amazing, perfect, and good, and they're like our bestest best friend, and then maybe they just don't show up for us one time or don't return our calls because they're busy, but we feel that deeply and it's very painful. And so instead of acknowledging that, hey, maybe that person just isn't as perfect or doesn't love us unconditionally, I don't know, instead of doing that, we say they're just bad, we can't trust them, they might abandon us or reject us, and we think they're all bad and they're cut off. Or we can pick a fight with them and cut them off. And so my patients with quiet borderline don't lash out at people so much, but they are very good at ghosting and just completely disappearing from people's lives and disconnecting without any communication. So if you find yourself doing that, where something small might happen, like they didn't text back after a couple of days, or they didn't get back to you about that thing, or they had to change plans last minute, and you want to completely cut them off, just take notice of that and think, is this helpful for me, or could this be part of my quiet borderline? Okay. Even if things are going good for us and we feel like we're moving forward in our career or with our relationships, we can start to second guess ourselves and think, I'm not really worth it. And that, like, not feeling like we don't have a good sense of self. We can feel like we don't exist, right? We can kind of spiral out and think, this isn't even working, and I'm not even good enough for this, and I'm not deserving of this. And instead of allowing ourselves to be happy and have things move forward, we can act in ways that can be detrimental to us down the line. These could be things like, dragging our feet in a project at work, or maybe picking a fight with our supervisor at the office, or doing things in our relationships that will hurt us later, or maybe not showing up for someone. There can be a lot of different ways we can sabotage, but the thing that's important to remember about this is that we may or may not know that we're doing this. Sometimes we don't have an awareness of this sabotaging behavior. So when you start to maybe feel not so bad, not great, but not so bad, maybe just pay a little extra attention to the ways that you're acting in your relationships or things that are working you towards your goals to ensure that we don't engage in any of this. Just take notice of that and think, is this helpful for me, or could this be part of my quiet borderline? Okay. And finally, sign number 10 is hypervigilance. Since BPD is most often caused from trauma and PTSD, we can feel very queued up and on edge. And any loud noise can it can trigger a panic attack or send us into a dissociative episode. We can just always feel very overwhelmed and on edge, and any small thing can just set us off. So pay attention to how reactive you are to your environment and how queued up you feel. And one little tip I'll give you is if you feel this way often, doing a full body shake when we start to feel it build can give our nervous system the release that it so desperately needs. I hope those signs and symptoms were helpful, because quiet BPD is really often misdiagnosed or missed altogether. I've had many of you tell me you're misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder or major depressive disorder, and they've completely missed the other signs and symptoms that you experience because, like I said, they're more internal instead of outward based. And so our therapists, our psychiatrists, psychologists might have missed them. And so I think it's really important that we share in this information and share in the comments if you have any other signs and symptoms you think that I missed, because it's really important that we all learn together. And with that, let's jump into 6 ways that we can better manage it. My first tip, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And essentially the goal of this is to notice those thoughts. If you're having self-sabotaging thoughts or thoughts about your self-worth that aren't positive, pay attention. Stop the shit talking. Sometimes we just have to recognize that it's happening, and instead of thinking that we have to make it positive, that's like that toxic positivity thing that's been going around online, like just think it's good and it will be. No, that's not how it works. But we can pay attention to these negative thoughts and work to make them more neutral. It sounds silly and it doesn't sound as positive. Like, let's say this negative thought is, no one's ever gonna love me, I'm not good enough. Instead of trying to think, everybody loves me and I'm amazing, a neutral thought would be, I'm open to the belief that I could feel better about myself. Now, I know that that doesn't feel a huge, it's not hugely positive. It might not feel like a huge shift, but trust me when I tell you that paying attention to our thoughts and working them into a more neutral place will completely change your life and help out with a lot of that negative self-image and talk that happens with quiet borderline. My second tip is dialectical behavior therapy, otherwise known as DBT. And I took some notes because I broke down the modules of DBT. If for those of you who aren't familiar, DBT runs along and you move through modules as you work on your mindfulness, then into distress tolerance, like how can I manage upsets in my life? Then we work on some emotion regulation skills, and then finally interpersonal effectiveness, which means working on my relationships so I can better communicate and feel more understood. So those are the modules of DBT, but I broke them into the first 2, the mindfulness and distress tolerance, are more acceptance modules. So if you find some of the things you're struggling with most is acceptance of yourself or acknowledgement of what you're feeling, those are going to be the modules you're going to want to focus on. And then the second component, the emotion regulation and the interpersonal effectiveness, are more change-based modules, meaning now I want to go out into my life and improve my relationships, right? Or find ways to better regulate my emotions in the moment. So overall, DBT is incredibly helpful for BPD. It was actually created by Marsha Linehan, who herself has BPD, and just found that there was no real therapy that was helpful for people who felt so dysregulated and always feared, had this intense fear of abandonment. And so I cannot encourage you to look into a DBT-based therapist in your area. It's truly life-changing. My third tip, be more mindful of your emotions and how you feel. I often personally will struggle to identify my emotions, but I can tell you what my body's telling me because I can experience it that way. That's easier for me. It might not be for you, but getting to know yourself, right? If I'm feeling super stressed out, I might be more spacey. I don't sleep as well. My hunger fullness is off, right? There's certain things that I know personally I'm going to feel, and I can recognize it earlier so that I can intervene with some helpful things earlier. And so take some time to get to know yourself and how you experience life so that you can take care of yourself before we maybe lash out at a loved one. And a great acronym from DBT is called HALT, and it stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Check in on those things, because if we're not taking care of our basic needs, we are much more vulnerable to our emotional outbursts and upsets. Tip number 4 is to build a healthy support team. This could be friends and family, therapists, psychiatrists, whoever is helpful around you. It can be really beneficial to have other people to fact check with. When we feel things so intensely, it can be helpful to talk to someone and say, hey, did you think that person was being extra rude? And they can say yes or no. And that can give us a little bit of a breather before we maybe act impulsively. And having people to check in on us and make sure we're not isolating, overall, having a support system is incredibly beneficial. My 5th tip, use impulse logs. I have impulse logs. I think they're on page 190 of my traumatized book. I might be wrong, but they're in there. And what an impulse log is it has you write down what it is you're wanting to do. What's that impulse that you feel? Then it has you express what's going on, what's happening around me. Then the next is kind of like, these are like columns I'm working through. So the third thing would be, what are some emotions that I'm experiencing, or what is it that I actually want to express? Then we have to come up with some other things that we could do alternatively. And then we usually wait, like I have my patients after they've done the impulse log, I want them to wait 30 minutes, and then I give them permission to do whatever they want. Because the thing about impulses is if we don't act on them within, honestly, for most people, within 30 minutes to an hour, the impulse is gone. Not always. This isn't 100% of the time, but most often that's the case. So if we can just build something into that time, an impulse log, and we wait, we use some distraction techniques and things, we can prevent ourselves from acting in ways that we really don't want to. So I cannot recommend impulse logs enough. And my final tip, tip number 6, is what's called playing it out. Now this is a CBT tool, and playing it out means run me through, or run yourself through, what the worst case scenario would be. That's usually easy because we've already gone there. So tell me about it. What would it look like? What would be that worst case that could play out in this situation? Then what would be the best case scenario? Tell me if the world always, everything always went in your favor and everything just happened just in the right time. What would that look like? And then finally, what is the most likely scenario? And I find doing this practice of best case, worst case, most likely calms us down, helps us see pretty much all the options out there, and forces us at the end to focus on what's most likely to happen. And that can sometimes assuage any of those, impulses, urges, or self-deprecating thoughts. I hope that was helpful. Like I said earlier, do you have any other signs or symptoms of quiet BPD that you wish I had included? Leave those in the comments. Or are there any other ways that you best manage your symptoms? Please share, because it's with my expertise and your experience that we work together towards a healthy mind and a healthy body. And I'll see you next time.
Today I want to explain how we know that the way Einstein thought about gravity cannot be correct. Einstein's idea was that gravity is not a force, but it is really an effect caused by the curvature of space and time. Matter curves space-time in its vicinity, and this curvature in return affects how matter moves. This means that, according to Einstein, space and time are responsive. They deform in the presence of matter, and not only matter, but all types of energies, including pressure and momentum flux and so on. Einstein called his theory general relativity because it's a generalization of special relativity. Both are based on observer independence, that is, the idea that the laws of nature should not depend on the motion of an observer. The difference between general relativity and special relativity is that in special relativity, space-time is flat, like a sheet of paper, while in general relativity it can be curved, like the often named rubber sheet. General relativity is an extremely well-confirmed theory. It predicts, for example, that light rays bend around massive objects like the sun, which we have observed. The same effect also gives rise to gravitational lensing, which we have also observed. General relativity further predicts that the universe should expand, which it does. It predicts that time runs more slowly in gravitational potentials, which is correct. General relativity predicts black holes, and it predicts just how the black hole shadow looks like, which is what we have observed. It also predicts gravitational waves, which we have observed, and the list goes on.
So there is no doubt that general relativity works extremely well. But we already know that it cannot ultimately be the correct theory for space and time. It is an approximation that works in many circumstances but fails in others. We know this because general relativity does not fit together with another extremely well-confirmed theory, that is quantum mechanics. It's one of these problems that's easy to explain but extremely difficult to solve. Here's what goes wrong if you want to combine gravity and quantum mechanics. We know experimentally that particles have some strange quantum properties. They obey the uncertainty principle, and they can do things like being in two places at the same time. Concretely, think about an electron going through a double slit. Quantum mechanics tells us that the particle goes through both slits at the same time. Now, electrons have a mass, and masses generate a gravitational pull by bending space-time. This brings up the question, to which place does the gravitational pull go if the electron travels through both slits at the same time? You would expect the gravitational pull to also go to two places at the same time. But this cannot be the case in general relativity because general relativity is not a quantum theory. To solve this problem, we have to understand the quantum properties of gravity. We need what physicists call a theory of quantum gravity. And since Einstein taught us that gravity is really about the curvature of space and time, what we need is a theory for the quantum properties of space and time. There are two other reasons how we know that general relativity can't be quite right. Besides the double slit problem, there is the issue with singularities in general relativity. Singularities are places where both the curvature and the energy density of matter become infinitely large. At least that's what general relativity predicts. This happens, for example, inside black holes and at the beginning of the universe. In any other theory that we have, singularity are a sign that the theory breaks down and has to be replaced by a more fundamental theory. And we think the same has to be the case in general relativity, where the more fundamental theory to replace it is quantum gravity. The third reason we think that gravity must be quantized is the trouble with information lost in black holes. If we combine quantum theory with general relativity but without quantizing gravity, then we find that black holes slowly shrink by emitting radiation. This was first derived by Stephen Hawking in the 1970s, and so this radiation is also called Hawking radiation. Now it seems that black holes can entirely vanish by emitting this radiation. Problem is, the radiation itself is entirely random and does not carry any information besides the temperature. So when the black hole is entirely gone and all you have left is this radiation, you do not know what formed the black hole. Such a process is fundamentally irreversible and therefore incompatible with quantum theory. It just does not fit together. And a lot of physicists think that to solve this problem, we need a theory of quantum gravity. So this is how we know that general relativity has to be replaced by a theory of quantum gravity. This problem has been known since the 1930s. Since then, a lot of attempts have been made to solve it. I will tell you about this some other time, so don't forget to subscribe.
Earth has a raging biodiversity, okay? And they want to sort of look in on their plant brethren. And so then they arrive, and then they find humans. They won't really understand humans because humans are animals, right? And they're plants. So they won't think much. They'll just care about the plants. And they'll see the tree, the giant sequoia lives 1,000 years. They'll see all kinds of plant life. They'll be very impressed, but then they'll notice that there's a subset of humans who specifically target plants to eat. They'll be terrified by this, okay? Because they're plants. They might get grabbed and stolen and eaten and corralled. And so and then they look more closely and they go to, we have there's Whole Foods in the UK, I don't know. There's one nature store, a nature grocery store, and they'll see the produce aisle, and then they'll see that the foods that this subset of humans target, let's just broadly call them vegetarians, they seek out the reproductive organs of the plants, which are the nuts, the berries, the sprouts, the flowers. They're specifically extracted and consumed. This freaks them out even more. And then they look closer, and then they find that this community further targets the baby versions of those plants.
A plant, on the other hand, or a tree, doesn't actually care if it's being chopped down, if it's being kicked. It cares as much as a rock being kicked would, Matt.
Can you pause?
Yeah.
If you cut a tree, does it not bleed?
And it's a pleasure to meet you. It's really not every day that I have someone as influential as you on my channel, so it really...
Well, no, I care about, anytime when I'm invited to a podcast, the typical invitation reads, well, this is my downloads and this is other famous people we've had, so therefore you should want to do this. And I don't give a rat's ass about any of that. I just care that your heart's in the right place, you have an authentic mission statement, and you're trying to do good in the world. And so you are well above that threshold, in spite of the internet, in spite of the what did you call it? The we got to talk, whatever.
Oh, the clickbait.
Yeah. In spite of the clickbait, that's fine. But it is what it is. So yeah, I'm ready for you.
Yeah, so I think it would be good to start talking about your new book. You included a chapter on the topic of animal ethics, which is what interests me mostly. The ethics
of course, I didn't call it that because that implies that I'm passing judgment for you on how you should think about a subject. But nowhere in the book am I giving you an opinion, because I don't care if you have my opinion. It's my opinion. You can have your own opinion. But if you have an opinion, as a scientist, it's incumbent upon me to ask you, how well thought out is your opinion? So that chapter is simply titled Meatarians and Vegetarians, okay? Just to get the symmetry of the word form. Meatarian is, of course, a less familiar form of just meat eater. But all I do is I talk about meat eaters and vegetarians and whether they're...
In this video, we're going to be looking at autism in girls and specifically 5 social anxiety traits coming up. Hey, I'm Dan. I have Asperger's syndrome, ADHD and OCD, dyslexia. I make weekly videos on this type of content, so if you're new around here and want to learn more, consider subscribing.
Hey guys, I'm Charlotte and I have a diagnosis of autism, and today I'm going to be sharing some personal experience of my social anxiety traits.
Hey man, leave us a comment in the comment section below. Let us know if you're on the spectrum or if you're like a person who has a loved one or whatever on the spectrum and you're looking at this video to kind of gain some help and experience for them. Hey guys, welcome back to the Asprey world. I'm super awesome to actually have a guest here today. This is the first collab I've done this year. I've never had another influencer. So Charlotte is actually quite well known for her MTV show on Just the Two of Us, which I'll leave some links down below and some stuff on the screen here if you want to see that. Also, she runs a really cool Instagram account, but more importantly, she's launching a YouTube channel, so I'll be leaving the link for that in the description below, that you all have to go down and subscribe and show some love, because we need more females on the spectrum on this platform, so that's super cool. We wanted to do a video for a while, and one of the things we wanted to do was talk about autism in girls and different things, so we decided to talk about social anxiety since it's such a huge issue, or it's a big, well talked about topic, but I feel like it's not as talked about for girls, I feel like it's always male dominated, there's always males kind of doing this, that, and the other. So in this video, we're literally talking about Charlotte's perspective of those traits and her personal insight and things like that, because I think this is going to be really valuable to all of you guys. So we're going to go through 5 different things and just really sum it up by the end of it and talk about it, have a discussion. And if you want to jump in at any single time and add anything in, put it in the comment section below and give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying this type of content. So number 1 is masking. So Charlotte, do you want to take us through a little bit about masking and some of your personal insight and experience with that?
So one of the things that affects me is masking, and this is something that I'd say most women do on the spectrum actually. It's a really, really common trait, and basically it's hiding your traits and pretending to be a version of yourself that is socially acceptable, masking and hiding my traits so that the other person can't suspect anything odd or weird or anything. And what I tend to do is I copy and mimic other people's behavior so that I can represent a socially acceptable version of myself.
Would you say that this is, you pick up masking from watching like TV and film? Because this is an interesting topic. Like, would you say that you learn social kind of masking from like mimicking people on movies and
It's
stuff?
basically from years of being rejected socially, and so you take characteristics from other people, you're adopting other people's behavior and characteristics and applying it to your own. It's basically just lying and putting on a front. So you're pretending to be somebody else, you're pretending to be something that is socially acceptable so that you can connect with someone else, but then you're actually hiding your true self.
What kind of effect does actually masking have on you as a person? So if you go through your day and you're masking, obviously you're not being comfortable in your own skin and you're not being you. What kind of effect, what repercussions can that have?
Well, that has had massive repercussions on me, especially as an adult, because over the years it's something that I've done so long that you start to lose sense of self. And this actually led to me having identity problems because I was hiding my traits so often and putting on this front where I was somebody completely different just to fit in that I didn't know who I actually was.
That's fascinating. Because like, I think one of the main factors for why females have been not as diagnosed as males is because masking is apparent, and they say, oh well, you know, they're fine here, they're fine there, or whatever. You know, it's weird that it's now what, like, masking was a thing that we didn't even know existed, but it's now that we're able to put an actual name to it and say it's this thing. Well, I find that quite fascinating.
It's a bit of a tricky thing as well, and I know that there's not a lot out there on women on the spectrum especially, so that's why I'm doing my bit to raise awareness. So the reason it's a tricky thing is because it's a massive trait, but it also goes against being diagnosed. So if you're actively seeking a diagnosis, then you're so good at hiding it that sometimes not even a professional can diagnose you because you can't see it. You've got so good at, especially as an adult as well on the spectrum, you get so used to hiding your traits that you are now this brilliant actress that you didn't even know.
And another thing about masking is that, like, you develop coping or like workaround strategies, right? So this is something that I find fascinating. So in terms of, like, a lot of people say, oh, I got undiagnosed at X amount of years, and they say, oh, I didn't know you had an issue with that. But then they make like workaround coping mechanisms. For instance, like if you didn't want to talk, you get anxiety talking on the phone to order pizza, yeah. So anytime you'd be anywhere with you want to order pizza, you'd always say to somebody, oh, can you do it first? I just got to go to the toilet, or I'm just going to go to do something else.
It's simple things like that. So
it's
for
like
example,
workaround behaviours.
I am absolutely the worst person in the world to pick up the phone, and I can't make conversation on the phone. I can't do anything that requires an immediate response because I find that is far too much pressure. So I'll let somebody else do it, or for example, if I have to pay for an item, I'll let somebody else do it. You know, it's little things.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it just fascinates me, and I think that this is one of the reasons why we're having a huge gap in the amount of females to males being actually diagnosed. But I think that gap is getting smaller and smaller now. So having things like the National Autistic Society have a new program, a training program for autism girls. It's really good, and people like yourself doing more advocacy on it. It's going to be awesome. Okay, so number 2 is selective mutism. Do you want to talk to us a bit about selective mutism?
Yes, selective mutism. It's something that affects me mainly when I'm in groups of people. So one-to-one speaking to someone, I'm pretty good. I'm actually pretty great, especially if I've got something in common to talk about. Otherwise, not really. Not that good.
Yeah, you're not able to say anything.
This is actually something that led to my diagnosis because while I was away filming for MTV, I went out for a meal as a group with some of the other artists, and I literally became stuck. I was trapped inside of myself, and it got to a point where I was so overwhelmed by everything in my environment, and socially especially, that I physically couldn't speak. And it's hard because when you're trying to explain this to someone, because you have to be in that situation to experience it, and there's no way they can test it really. So
how often how often would you say that you experience kind of selective mutism, and what type of situations would you experience it?
Probably where And I mean, like, for some bizarre reason, it tends to be more around people my own age. And I'm not sure if that's because, I don't know, are people our age more?
Maybe, I think it's maybe because maybe you feel like expected to be a certain way around the people your own
to
age.
be act a certain way and behave a certain way.
Yeah, and not be, and yeah, like saying acting a certain way and being that kind of like typical person when you're not a typical person. So you might feel like, you know, I can't contribute to this situation, so you just kind of maybe clam up or something. I don't know, I'm just trying to figure it out, but it is fascinating. Like, I've experienced this, and it wasn't until you said it to me. We were like WhatsApping, talking about doing this video and talking about different things. He's suffering mutism, and I've experienced this when I go to Naomi's mum's house, and we have like, I don't know, they do like family dinners or like a party.
Family dinners, oh my god,
I just like,
the worst.
and then Naomi says to me, it's like, Dan, you don't speak, like you don't. Why do you engage with people? Why are you speaking and stuff? I'm like, I have no idea. Like, I have no idea why.
There's that pressure there to have to be social and to have to make conversation, and then you're applying even more pressure on yourself.
Yeah, and it just spirals down to, okay, this is never going to happen. I guess like
I always have this really intense fear of being judged on anything that I say. So then like it gets to the point where it's so bad, and I've clammed up so much that anything I do actually say, like any sentence I can actually get out, give myself a little pat on the back. I'm like, yes, I managed to say something.
Well, I totally get that. I mean, I can appreciate that, and you know, it is a difficult thing to overcome. So I mean, maybe you're noticing this in, say, you're a parent watching this, or a guardian, or a loved one, or whatever, and you're noticing these kind of traits in somebody. It's quite interesting. If you're just coming across this for the first time, then it may be possible that they have a spectrum condition, because I find this is very valuable. Okay, so number 3 is making small talk, and this one kind of rings true to me as well. I know a lot about kind of like how it's difficult to make small talk when having a spectrum condition, because that is just like, it's super difficult. So do you want to talk a bit about your obviously experiencing it and being a female on the spectrum?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, a lot of people would probably doubt this, and a lot of people that have met me personally, and that's because I mean, I will make the effort to chat to them, but what I'm actually doing is running off a script of stuff I've learnt to say over the years that is socially acceptable, and I'm just repeating myself basically in every conversation with every single person, because when that script runs out, what do I say now?
Yeah, I can totally relate, and like I have a few things that I talk about. One, I'll talk about SEOs with people, and then when they're not interested in that, I'm like, okay, well, I'll talk about politics, because I know a lot about politics, right? And if they're not interested in politics, I'm kind of all out. You know, somebody says to me, "Oh, let's talk about cars." I'm like, there's no way this conversation's going to go anywhere. And I find like those situations are like the panic situations. I'm like, oh, what am I going to do now?
It's because as well, like, I mean, it's a common autistic trait that people with autism tend to speak about themselves and speak about their interests, and then you've also got the added factor where you have to actively try to pretend to be interested in that other person when actually
you don't care.
You don't care.
Yeah,
you just don't care, and it's not that you're not a caring person. It's just that you're very strict on your interests, and that's all you enjoy talking about.
It's really very, very interesting, and I love kind of having conversations with other autistic individuals, because you can relate to them so much, and it's interesting because like, you go through life just thinking like things yourself, and you talk to somebody like, oh yeah.
I mean, because me and you can talk loads about autism.
That's right, because we can talk about the things because we have that kind of common ground. But it's interesting when you with like typical people who want to talk about like cars, work, and going out. It's like, it's so weird.
And especially like, I mean, I don't have typical interests the girls have, for example, having my nails done, or I have no idea what to talk about. To be honest.
No, it's totally true. Like, so I don't drink alcohol, and like a lot of guys like love drinking beer and all this stuff. So if I meet like Naomi's family members or whatever, they talk about beer and drinking, I'm like, I'm completely out of left field here. I have no idea what's going on. You know, like it's
really difficult. I think it's probably more difficult to find for people to find common ground with me.
Maybe
it must be hard for them as well, because they must be able to sense when I'm not actually interested, because
well, look, I mean, it's like you said, it's a very typical trait of autism, and I feel that like if you're experiencing this yourself and you can relate to this, then this is definitely the video for you. And leave us a comment down below as well if you're experiencing this. I'd love to talk to people about the different types of experiences they're having. Okay, so number 4 is fear of socializing, and this is a huge one. I mean, socializing for anybody on the spectrum is a very difficult situation, especially with the people you don't know, and if it's a large group of people. So let me know how do you experience that fear of socializing?
Well, Well, I mean, it's not something that other people could notice because, like I said earlier, hiding traits. And this applies to this one massively because I'm basically absolutely, I get like a lump in my throat, and I feel absolute dread when I know that I have to be social with someone or speak to someone on a personal level. And it's not because they're not interesting people, it's just because I generally am extremely intimidated by people when I first meet them as well. So yeah, it just builds up avoidance issues as well.
Do you feel like it kind of builds up a frustration or an anger? So like if you're forced to be in social situations, you obviously have a fear of it, and then masking comes into play. Does that ever have a kickback? Like, oh my goodness, you know, because with me, because it's different, because we're males on the spectrum, I just don't, you know, if I'm in a situation where people expect something of you, we don't really technically have that masking ability, I guess, because, you know, the female and male brains do work slightly differently in that respect. And
I think it's because, like, in general, women are more socially aware, I think.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, it would really matter to me what other people thought. So, I mean, I know that matters anyway. Like,
no, but it's a thing that you instantly think about at that moment in time. So you're like, okay, I need to get through this, and I need to do this, and again, masking comes into play. But I'm wondering, like, does that have a kickback? So you do you do masking, you force yourself through a fearful situation of socializing. Then, like, later on at home, did you ever kick you in the head and just?
Yes, absolutely. So, like, anything that happens, like any social event that happens during the day, I will go home and I will really sit and think about it, and I'll think like, well, I shouldn't have said that, or I should have said it differently, or perhaps did I offend that person, and then it just makes you so scared of just socializing.
Yeah, and even trying to do it.
Yeah, because you just think that I'm useless at this and I'm gonna fail, so then it just instills an absolute fear in you, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what makes me so scared to connect with other people.
I know, I think it's because it's the unpredictability of people, because you don't know how people are going to react to anything, and I think that's the fear, is that I don't know how they're going to react. And you know, it's taken me ages to figure this out, and working on this channel and working with professionals is how I've come to that conclusion, but that's what I think it is.
I think the intense fear as well comes from being socially rejected over the years.
Oh yeah,
because you're rejected so often
and you get used to that fear.
You get and then it gets to a point where, I mean, I wasn't treated very well in school. I was quite bullied in school for being the quiet one, believe it or not. And then you're even more scared of speaking because
it becomes a bigger thing. Yeah. That's crazy. But like, and that is the thing, you know, school is like probably the worst place. Like typical mainstream schools, kids can be mean as heck, so this doesn't help, especially for females who are trying their best to mask it, because again, the females, they're so clever in the way that, you know, female with autism is, like you said, they're trying to do all these things, and the guys are just like lazy typically in that respect. They don't try those things because I have no idea why, but that's how it works. And I just find it's crazy, because bullies can be so horrible, especially to someone who's already trying their hardest, you know. It's crazy.
Definitely, when you have to make the active effort as well, and you have to, and I mean, as people on the spectrum, we do actively have to make more of an effort than the average person, because it requires a lot more.
Yeah, it takes way more effort. It's like just even going to like the store and picking something up is like way more effort involved for someone with autism than it would be for a typical person, because of all that interaction, the lights, the sound, the stimuli, the people, the socializing, then calculating the money, the worrying, the anxiety of just being outside. Like, it's all of those things add up, and I think it's just, yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so number 5 is isolating or isolation. Do you want to talk a bit about how you isolate yourself and what isolation means?
So, I mean, this is probably a follow-on from the fear of socializing, because what happens is you get such a big fear of socializing that you become socially avoidant, and this can lead to other mental illnesses as well, like depression, for example. But sometimes, you know what, I can be at home and I can feel really low in myself because my social life's gone out the window, because I've just not got the energy to be able to invest in that because I'm busy during the day. And then what happens is I avoid everyone. I start to become depressed.
Yeah, because it's kind of like a catch-22, so you don't want to go out because you're feeling kind of that fear of like, you know, the social anxiety and stuff, and you feel like it's going to take more effort, but then when you don't go out and do those things, you become a bit more recluse, and then it gets worse, and then it kind of plays in your mind, and then your mood starts to dip, and then you're just in a downward spiral.
Also, another thing as well, like, I mean, for example, I can go out with my friends, right, and I'll have an amazing time out with my friends, we'll have a great laugh, and then I'll come home and I'll just cry, and It's because, like you said earlier, all those environmental factors, everything everything that's all the information your brain is trying to process at one time, it gets to a point where if you want to see me, you're just gonna have to come to my house.
Or deal with the fact that text messages are the way to go. But I interviewed a guy. I was doing a collaboration video with a guy called Kevin Chapman, who's a really big YouTuber and autism advocate on the platform. And Kevin's got a son called Andy who has autism, and he said to me that every day every Monday Andy would come home from school and just throw up. Like every Monday he'd come home, throw up, and he's like, what on earth's going on? No other day, just the Monday, come home, throw up on the floor. And he's like, Dan, what's going on? I said, well, he's had Friday evening, Saturday and Sunday to just chill out and be in his own zone and be comfortable, and then he goes into a school environment which throws him all out, and he's having to deal with that all day, and then he just goes crazy sick. So it's kind of like, I can totally understand about that. I've not really experienced that myself because I've been used to isolating myself for ages, so I can't remember the last time I'd forced myself to go out in a situation, because like you want to go out and have that fun with your friends. I'm not really bothered. I'd rather just kind of like separate myself, and I think that is the difference between the male and the female on the spectrum.
The friends I have are the friends that just know how useless I am maintaining friendships, and they kind of accept that, and they just think, well, Charlotte's the way she is, and if I want to see her, I'm just gonna have to give her a call. Or
yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I think that like being proud of who you are as well is going to definitely help overcome any kind of like stigma about those things. Okay, so just want to say thanks for Charlotte to come down and actually do this video. It's super awesome, and I'm looking forward to getting a tattoo from you sometime in the near future.
woo!
If you want to check out the next video, it's all about autism symptoms in girls, and I'll leave it in the next video card. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to learn more. See you next time, guys.
See you soon, guys.
NANI?!
Cramp. Probably everybody watching has experienced it at some point, so it's truly one of the most universal human physical experiences, if not one of the most pleasant, and yet we don't really understand it. Sure, you can do what every serious medical professional does when they don't know something, look it up on YouTube, and you will find no shortage of videos telling you the cause of cramp. Except they don't. They tell you risk factors for cramp, or things we think precipitate it. Things I'm sure you've heard before. Excessive exercise, dehydration, electrolyte disturbance, medication, blah blah blah. They don't actually tell me anything about what is going on inside my muscles to cause them to lose the fucking plot. So the information contained therein is useful, but boring. And this is Midlife Crisis, where we focus on the useless, but interesting. I don't know why I use the plural there. It's just me. And what I, a senior doctor with a long-standing interest in exercise physiology, do not know is what exactly is happening when we get a cramp. I've genuinely never learned this. What is the mechanism? Why do our stupid, moronic, junk heap, meat popsicle bodies do this to us? Well, after the scientific resource that is YouTube let me down, I did what I probably should have done in the first place anyway. I went to the medical literature, and researching cramp has actually produced a few valuable lessons about the state of science and research overall. In a way, I love the fact that there are still these really fundamental questions about basic things in human biology that remain unanswered, like why we yawn, or how the placebo effect works. I just made a video on that one. Why we age, how general anesthetic works, or why Americans say aluminum. So let's see if we can figure this one out. As a demonstration of how niche this is, I have a medium-sized Twitter following, just under 50,000 followers who are mostly medical or science adjacent.
Because the word
and
escapes
I asked
them.
if any were, or if they knew any experts in cramp. Not a single reply. So if you are an expert in cramp, please do get in touch. Although I will declare now that as soon as I hit publish on a video, I typically completely stop caring about it and the subject matter entirely. However, I have an ulterior motive why I've spent so much time looking into this, other than just dedication to the noble vocation of YouTubery. I get absolutely agonizing cramp. Not the kind where you're playing sports or sitting on the floor for a while in your thigh or your foot. That's okay, I get those too. I can just stretch them out and no big deal. And I'll talk about the different cramp a bit later on. But in my calves, invariably when I've just woken up in the morning, the slightest flex of my calf muscle, the gastrocnemius, literally just moving my foot a millimeter downwards, and like a hair trigger, boom, my calf cramps up and I leap out of bed in pain. And the pain is bad, but I realize the main reason I've come to dread this so much is not the immediate pain. It's because I know in that split second that I'm going to be in pain for a week and there's nothing that I can do to stop it. If, as the normal definition you'll find online for cramp, is the transient, temporary contraction of part of the muscle, why am I left out of action for days afterwards? Is this like some evil version of muscle memory, or have I actually damaged the muscle in some way? I'm sure I can't be the only one who experiences this, so I'd really love to hear your cramp experiences, which is probably a sentence that hasn't been said before, because this isn't something that's well documented or talked about in a scientific way all that much. Now, I've got something called benign fasciculation syndrome, which is where muscles twitch uncontrollably, like a lot of people get in their eyelids, but I used to get in my abs or my glutes, biceps, and those kinds of muscles quite frequently. It has actually pretty much gone in recent years, as I'm getting old. But I was already aware that there was an overlap between that and cramp, so I assumed that I'm predisposed to getting cramp in some way. You might have seen these viral videos where someone has filmed a severe muscle cramp with the muscle visibly, sucking in, cramping up. And I don't understand these because the person seems quite calm and able to hold a camera, and that is not my experience at all. No matter how quickly I get up to stretch the muscle out, I am left with a tender lump in my calf for the next few days. And me wondering what the hell that lump is the question that kind of prompted this whole video, because I simply couldn't get an answer from anywhere online. But luckily I have access to ultrasound machines at work, and a little while ago, after I had one of my fairly regular acute agony sessions, I scanned that lump in my leg and I was really surprised with the result. As a quick aside, I learnt from Tom Scott that a leg cramp has actually got a specific name on the other side of the Atlantic. Charlie Horse for 400 points.
That is...
And
just there.
Is that like some American...
That is an American term for a cramp, I think.
I see, all right.
Some sort of cramp, I don't know. These are all very American cards. All right.
Well, you're paying for your surgery here, Tom. Did that not give you a clue it's an American game? The one thing everyone will tell you about when you mention cramp is dehydration and electrolytes. Sorry, that's actually two things, isn't it? But I'm pretty confident that when I'm getting cramp, my electrolytes haven't gone up the spout. My blood test is not going to show an abnormal sodium or potassium, magnesium, calcium. Those are quite pathological states to be in. Even when patients come into the hospital who are quite sick, their electrolytes aren't always deranged. And I don't have overt evidence of dehydration, but, blood tests measure exactly what they sound like they do, blood levels, which is often not the same as what's going on inside a cell. So that was my initial starting point when trying to figure out why this happens, because it can't be as simple as just an abnormal electrolytes or dehydration, because that isn't reality for most people. Let's start by looking at the different types of cramp. Period cramps are, of course, one of the most common and can be intensely painful as well. These are caused by contraction of the large, powerful muscle in the uterus, and obviously I don't have first-hand experience of this one, but there is some interesting research suggesting it can be as painful as a heart attack. Uterine muscle is smooth muscle, which is different to striated, or literally stripy muscle, which is skeletal muscle. In essence, smooth muscle is not controlled voluntarily. You find it in many places in the body, your blood vessels, your gut, the muscles that move food along. I don't know why I'm doing this motion. Maybe this is medical sign language for peristalsis. And that's the word we give the movement of stuff through the gut. Do you know what the word is for the sound of all that movement, the tummy rumbles? Boborygmi. Any OG subscribers may remember my medical words video from a few years ago, which legitimately I think is still one of my favorite videos that I've made. Honestly, I think, I don't know why I've gone on this massive tangent. I think thinking about cramp for so long has driven me a bit peculiar. Of course, you have one other type of muscle in the body, which is the heart, and thank goodness we don't get cramp in the heart. But that's also kind of interesting. Why not? That's a rhetorical question. We don't know. But it's doubtless something to do with the fact that the heart muscle cells are just so highly specialized and insanely efficient compared to other cells, which also might give us a clue to the crampy cause. Then we have what's called pathological cramp. This is muscle cramping in the context of a disease. such as things like liver disease or diabetes causing problems with the nerves, which is a neuropathy, or diseases affecting the neuromuscular junction like motor neuron disease or ALS. Remember the Ice Bucket Challenge? That seems like a lifetime ago. And sometimes cramp can be caused by medication. I'm not going to be considering any of those types of cramp in this video. I'm going to focus on cramp affecting healthy skeletal muscle. In general, this is classified as exercise-induced cramp or nocturnal leg cramps. It's actually unclear if they're different phenomena. In fact, some papers go further to subdivide multiple types of cramp: calf cramp that footballers get in extra time, full body lockups that American footballers and tennis players apparently describe, cramp in small muscles that typists might get, cramps that are preceded by fasciculations or twitching, cramps that occur at the start of exercise, cramps that occur at the end of exercise. You can keep going further and further down the rabbit hole, which is kind of cramped. But to preserve my sanity, I think we can group them together as cramp affecting striated or skeletal muscle in the absence of any systemic disease or toxin, i.e. in healthy people. Whew, okay, we've got that out of the way. For something that is so common, the Wikipedia entry is remarkably brief. Pages and pages on the toilet paper orientation debate or erotic bluey fan fiction, but a few paragraphs on this and no proposed mechanism, which is reflective of the fact that there isn't a great deal of scientific evidence about this. And those of you familiar with the medical field will know that this isn't an unusual thing. When there's no money to be made from research, it's unlikely you'll receive much funding. I found about 50 papers from the last few decades that go into some proposed mechanisms of cramp, and it boils down to a shootout between two competing theories: the dehydration hypothesis and the neuromuscular hypothesis. Let's start with a helpful meta-analysis of multiple studies which defines a cramp as severe involuntary muscle contraction that resolves in seconds.
My binks didn't stop. Wow. Don't die.
Oh, almost.
that go into some proposed mechanisms of cramp, and it boils down to a shootout between two competing theories, the dehydration hypothesis and the neuromuscular hypothesis. Let's start with a helpful meta-analysis of multiple studies which defines a cramp as severe involuntary muscle contraction that resolves in seconds, minutes, or, in the worst case scenario, several hours. While the severe pain goes away quickly for me, I couldn't find much about a lingering, tender lump that persists for days. However, another review article which looked at endurance athletes said some cramps can indeed last days, and even said that can end athletic careers prematurely. Now, I didn't know that, and that is crazy. Before I get into possible explanations for cramp, I think we ought to understand the basics of how muscles contract. Now, I could do a ham-fisted job of this, but there's really only one muscle that I care about, and thankfully, as I mentioned, the heart isn't troubled with all this cramping nonsense. So instead, I thought I'd ask a friend who is so dedicated to understanding muscle that he's collected an absurd amount on his own skeleton. If you want to understand physiology, there really is nobody better than Dr. Mike Todorovich, whose fantastic channel with Dr. Matt Barton is currently on exactly the same number of subscribers as me, and sure to leave me in the dust very soon. And so let's go over to Mike to explain the basics of how muscles work. Now, this is a bit embarrassing. When I first spoke to Mike, I pretended to be Australian, and it's been a few years now, and I've just kind of got trapped in the lie. I mean, you know how it is. G'day, Mike.
Hey, Rowan.
Mike, I'm making a video about... Mike, what are you wearing?
T-shirt.
No, that's a way to get my video demonetized. Keep that skin-tight stuff on OnlyFans, thanks. Listen, Mike, I'm making a video about why I get such insane cramp, whether anybody actually knows what cramp even is. So I figured we need to just start with understanding how muscles contract, and I thought you'd be just the guy. There wasn't a question, Mike. Can you just get on with it, you cunt?
Skeletal muscle like your biceps tend to cross joints, like the elbow joint here. And when that muscle contracts, that muscle shortens. And that results in the movement of the joint, and this is how skeletal muscle allows for you to move every single day. If you look inside of that muscle, you'll see that the contraction is due to just two major types of proteins. These proteins include that of myosin, which I've drawn up in blue, and actin that I've drawn up in red. For this shortening and contraction to occur, the myosin, specifically these myosin heads that you can see, they need to bind to the actin. And once they're bound to that actin, they need to pull that actin inward. That is the shortening That is the contraction. The problem is that the myosin cannot bind to the actin because the actin isn't free and available. Think about it like this. You are myosin and you want to ride your bike, which is the actin. The problem is that the actin or the bike has a bike chain wrapped around it. In this case, the bike chain has a name called tropomyosin. And as we know, bike chains are useless unless there is a bike lock. And there is a bike lock in this case, and it's called troponin. So what do we need in order to ride the bike? We need a key. That key is called calcium, specifically calcium ion that the muscle releases. Once the muscle releases the calcium, it unlocks the troponin, the tropomyosin chain falls away, and the myosin heads can bind to the actin. But now you need energy. Nothing can occur without energy, and energy in this case is going to be ATP. So there's two things that skeletal muscle must release for muscle contraction to occur. That is both calcium and ATP.
Oh, mate, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, what are you up to the rest of the day? Throwing a few shrimps on the barbie, eh? Having a cold stubby?
We're not really doing this, are we?
Playing with the ankle biters? Listen to a bit of Akadaka? Chuck on the budgie smugglers, eh?
Oh, just shut up, you stupid bastard.
Ah, don't spit the dummy, you great galah. No need to go tropo. Nin? The little biology joke for those in the know.
Right, that's it.
Good on you, mate. No dramas. Few kangaroos loose in the top paddock, that one, but he's a good lad. Oof, this video's got way too Australian suddenly, hasn't it? Well, here's a picture of the Chinese economy to bring the Aussie levels back down to baseline. Now, we've established how muscles work and the pivotal role of calcium, which you just heard about. Received wisdom about how cramp works is that the muscle contraction is caused by the calcium, possibly related to changes in sodium and potassium as well, because the levels of these electrolytes are often linked, but the jury is out. And if you go back as far as the early 1900s, which I did, a whole bunch of ideas have been put forward and retracted over the years, but bringing us up to the present from all the reading that I've done is how I think we can examine these two rival mechanisms, one that is almost a century old and one that was put forward in the 90s. First, there is the dehydration theory, or as one heavily cited paper said, dishydration, which I admit is a term I'd never heard before, perhaps because it's nonsense. It could be some ill-defined invented phenomenon, or it's a typo, and everybody has dutifully quoted it in their own papers ever since without checking. Science. Well, maybe that's the first state of science lesson. Lesson number one. Mistakes can propagate through the literature. And the other candidate is, our 90s kid, is the neuromuscular mechanism, i.e. some sustained abnormal discharge of the signals causing muscle contractions. The first thing I found is how contradictory studies seem to be. Several suggest that cramp seems to be more common early in a training program when fitness levels are lower and on cold days. And lots of the published data are from very fit people like endurance athletes, so, how applicable is that to the average person? An old study of steel workers suggested hot weather is a risk factor. Quite a few link dehydration to cramp, but some say dehydration doesn't correlate with rates of cramp. But it does correlate with increasing age, any history of heart or kidney or gastrointestinal problems, being on prescription medication, and a higher BMI. These all did correlate with more cramp, which is not to say they cause cramp. But then again, from the same cohort of people, those who complained of recurrent cramp actually showed lower BMI. Seems to be worse. As the authors of a review article succinctly put, there seem to be some mutually contradictory statements here. What a mess. After I had read about 30 papers or so, I honestly didn't feel much the wiser. And as with any area of science where evidence is weak, opinion tends to become the strongest driving factor as to how emphatically authors will propose what they believe is the mechanism. And that's maybe state of science lesson number 2, beware of editorial spin and bias. Dehydration is still the leading theory of the two, and I'm sure it's the one that you've heard about. The theory goes that as you sweat, you lose water, and the concentration of salts in your blood, the osmolality, goes up because you're losing more water than salt. And this draws fluid out of your cells into what's called the interstitial space, causing increased pressure on the nerves, causing them to become more excitable. Meanwhile, the neuromuscular hypothesis, the 90s kid, proposes localized muscle fatigue, causing increased spinal cord excitability, via exciting the muscle spindles and inhibiting the Golgi tendon organs. And those two things you can think of as essentially like stretch receptors in your muscles and your tendons. And yes, if you remember the Golgi apparatus inside a cell from biology class, same guy named this. In fact, Golgi, I think, has loads of things named after him. And on that note, why not? I'll tell you now. You heard it here first. I have started work on the intracellular tier list to follow up the organ tier list, and that's coming soon. And that excited spinal cord then causes the muscle to contract uncontrollably. And this tendon, spinal cord, muscle pathway echoes the way reflexes like your knee-jerk reflex works. When I was trying to dig into dehydration, first of all, I couldn't actually find anything suggesting dehydration was actually present in people getting cramp. There were loads and loads of studies saying people who sweat a lot get cramp, but not direct observation of dehydration. Multiple problems with the theory were raised, such as runners with or without cramp having no difference in their blood tests, or why a systemic loss of fluid or change in sodium concentration would only affect one part of one muscle. Then I found a review article which put forward a good case for dehydration. A review article is something where people have already summarized lots of the existing data, which is great because then you can follow all their references back to the source, starting with a retrospective look at workers that built the Hoover Dam way back in the 1930s. And this gave me my first clue, strongly suggesting excessive sweating led to cramp. Back in 1936, they, of course, didn't have isotonic drinks like Lucozade or Gatorade or Pocari Sweat or the connoisseur's choice, of course, Prime. Oh, actually, non-Asians might not know Pocari Sweat.
What is Pocari Sweat? That's a terrible name for a drink.
But ever since I first saw it when I made a pilgrimage to Japan over 20 years ago as a first-generation weeb, I have just loved the idea of selling a drink called Sweat and people buying it voluntarily. It tastes about how you'd imagine it would. Weirdly enough, I hadn't thought of Pocari Sweat since like 2014 when they were in the news because they wanted to become the first company to advertise on the moon. No joke, because they heard that water had been discovered on the moon, and I guess they were planning on rehydrating it or something. They were going to put a capsule on the moon and restore all its electrolytes. I went to check when I was making this video if that ever happened, and no, of course it didn't happen, but apparently it's going to launch this autumn. Sorry, I keep doing these tangents. I don't know why. I will try to focus now. It's brain cramp or something. I like this review article, which seemed to be well written, and I was feeling pretty convinced about the electrolyte dehydration theory. And then I found this at the end of the article. This supplement was supported by the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, the GSSI, and the supplement was guest edited by this person who attended a meeting of the GSSI expert panel and received honoraria from the GSSI, a division of PepsiCo, for his participation in the meeting. I should say the authors themselves were not paid or had any links to declare with Gatorade. Now, does that mean what is contained in this article is incorrect? No, of course not. But it kind of calls into question what I'm reading. And this is State of Science lesson number 3. Conflicts of interest abound. You can have the most honest principal investigator for a trial who takes no personal money from a drug company, but the research itself, and hence that person's career, may be funded by a pharmaceutical company who might exert editorial control over what results are released, for example, which sometimes the investigators don't have the final say over. For a study, you can still check the methodology and the data, so I'm definitely not suggesting any industry-funded trial is untrustworthy, and this is quite a tiresome trope from online quacks. There is that safety mechanism. You can consult the raw data and see exactly what they've done, but of course, you know, the company may choose not to publish negative trials, so that's a separate topic in itself. But a review article like this, by definition, involves a bit of subjectivity because you have to collate so many sources of data and give your impression. So I kept looking. For the neuromuscular theory, I dived into about a dozen papers looking at specific parts of the pathway, particular mechanisms, mouse models, small studies of human muscle cells in the lab, and I quickly got lost. It sounded plausible. And I felt like this is probably where I'd put my money if I had to choose, but there were things that contradicted each other, there were inconsistencies between studies. The bottom line is I simply didn't have enough expertise in the relevant field to draw any meaningful conclusions. And that's State of Science Lesson 4. You need relevant knowledge in order to assess the quality of studies. This is why I always advise caution with online or media medical experts who seem to cover a new topic every week and know about every imaginable field of medicine, even if they immerse themselves in a topic for a week or a month. There's no possible way they can spot their blind spots, or as Rumsfeld said, the unknown unknowns. I don't think I've got answers to many of my questions, but I do have knowledge of a field I hadn't explored before, and a deeper understanding of many of the processes involved. Even if the exact mechanism is unknown, many of the papers conclude by saying probably both theories are implicated in some ways, and perhaps cramp is just too disparate a group of different problems with a similar end symptom. Remember, I ignored all the pregnancy and period cramp and cramp secondary to disease or medication, which all falls under cramp as a term. So maybe they're just too disparate to be accurately considered a single entity, a bit like cancer, which we refer to as one disease, but it's actually dozens or hundreds of diseases. This sounds bad, doesn't it? I'm not comparing the two, even though my cramp is painful. I will concede that cancer is probably worse. Cancer is, of course, the big C, so maybe from now on we can refer to cramp as the little c. So why is cramp so hard to study? Well, the first reason is that it's simply very unpredictable. You can't stimulate it easily. You can't provoke it. There are no easy animal models to use. And secondly, there are no lives to be saved and very little money to be made. So what's the motivation aside from idle curiosity or the desire to write a YouTube video? So if you want to find out, I am launching a Kickstarter to abduct, recruit 100 athletes and isolate them on an island, divide them into groups where I subject them to different physiological insults, differing steroid regimens, take deep muscle biopsies as they train, bleed them, dehydrate them, overhydrate them, make them wear itchy polyester, sever their spinal cords, graft them together to form a long human cat. I've said too much, but you can help me by raising 8 million in Bitcoin, and I promise I will find an answer to the greatest unanswered question of our time. I'll make space on my mantelpiece for the inevitable Nobel Prize and finally find out what causes cramp. This truly is the pinnacle of scientific endeavor. I hope you can also see that in areas like this, which aren't hot topics and don't receive much attention, the quality of publications is very poor. Many of the studies that health podcasters like to cite about breath work and ice baths and saunas and mindfulness and all the other fashionable practices that they often talk about are actually incredibly badly performed studies or just extrapolations from very limited data sets and observational junk. Ironically, these tend to be the ones discussed by not just podcasters, but the media in general, rather than the really well-performed, high-quality studies that give much more useful advice and are published in much better journals. But because they typically come out with things we've heard before, eat healthily, exercise, sleep well, and so on, they don't get the same traction. And that's State of Science lesson number 5. Sexy science sells, even if it's rubbish. Now, I'm trying to be more like a typical medical influencer these days, so in addition to wearing ass-hugging designer scrubs, I need to bring everything back to myself. And I told you that I scanned my calf with an ultrasound machine the day after I got a bad morning cramp to find out what that sore sort of, it's like a 3-centimeter lump in my calf. It's tender, lasts for days, to find out what it actually was. And I got a picture. I didn't know what I was looking at. Sorry, the only machine I could access that day was a cheap one that doesn't save images, so excuse the phone picture. I went to ask one of my radiographer friends who told me this was a hematoma, which kind of blew my mind. A hematoma is basically a lump of blood, a 3D bruise. Normally a hematoma that size is caused by significant trauma to the muscle, like, getting punched. But my body had done that to itself. My calf muscle had cramped up so hard, the blood vessels had actually ruptured and I'd bled into my muscle. What the actual fuck? But at least it made a bit of sense. That's why my cramp pains last so long. That's why I have this lump there. I'm basically getting, you know, a big repeated bruise in my leg. I really haven't been able to find much about this online at all, so please do chime in if you know more. Now, I said midlife crisis videos are interesting but useless. But because this might not have been very interesting, let me at least try to be slightly useful and answer the most important question for the fellow unhappy crampers. Does anything consistently help? And that is a resounding no. Well, maybe not resounding. When all the prevention strategies have been analysed, none was found to reliably have any real effect on cramp. Magnesium, fluids, stretching, nada. That doesn't mean that they never worked in individual cases, because there are some caveats here. A major one is this was based on actually very limited study data. And it is so erratic that there may have been effects that are overall not captured, and it would need subgroup analyses. And it doesn't mean it never works, but overall the net effect seems to be zero. However, the fitness levels of people in these studies can be very varied. So it's hard to tease out what might be relevant to you. So with all the provisos that this is just anecdotal, which I feel less concerned to say than I would normally, because there's no strong evidence in this case. But for me, who is not an elite athlete, so, you know, you can imagine that if someone is a professional athlete, improving their fitness level isn't really going to change anything about their cramp because they're already so fit. But for me, the more I exercise, particularly involving stretching, the better my cramp seems to be. Now, I talk about exercise on this channel a lot. I talk about it on other channels a lot.
There is one medicine that's better than any other.
In a nutshell, the most important thing is exercise. Exercise, aerobic, anaerobic, and resistance exercise. Exercise again. Exercise, exercise, exercise. If you haven't guessed where I'm going with this, I'm of course talking about exercise. And yet, viewers, I have to confess something. I've been a hypocrite. A combination of starting my new job as the big boss man, moving out of London, spending all of my free time doing up our house and the garden, and of course, most importantly, being a husband and a dad. This is where I pivot to becoming a YouTube wife guy, meant that over the last year or so, I've really let my exercise slide. I was perhaps in the best shape I've been in since my 20s before I left London, mostly because I was paying quite a lot for a trainer. Just having someone to motivate me was essential, because my big problem is laziness.
You lack discipline.
I enjoy exercise, but I'm sure all of you out there who are busy for any number of reasons can empathize with that feeling of just struggling to muster the energy. My resting heart rate had started to climb up from the mid-40s to the high 50s. I felt weaker, my aging body's aches and pains became worse, and my recovery time from cramp was definitely getting longer. So I knew I had to do something. So I constructed myself a little home gym. All right, it's workout number one. And it gathered dust. And then I finally accepted that I needed some help. And since January, I have got back into regular exercise thanks to Copilot, who are sponsoring this video. Copilot is an app, but it's different to other fitness apps because it's really a direct connection to a real person who helps you towards your fitness goal, whether that's to run a marathon, have rippling muscles, or improve your back pain and stop getting so much cramp. Guess which category I fell into. They assign you a professional coach based on your preferences and goals. I was paired up with Austin. We had an in-depth chat about what I wanted to get, and he designed a tailor-made plan for me based on what I had at home. If I didn't have any weights, that's not a problem. You know, you don't need equipment. The plan is also dynamic. He changes it as we go based on my progress. For me, the number one thing is accountability, motivation to work out. He'll drop me a line if I miss a session to see what's up, and then can adapt things on the fly if I say I've got an injury, which is basically all the time. We message each other now, you know, through the app, and we've become buddies. We compare DIY and camping pics. Man, I'm such a cliched dad. You already know that I'm a wearables nerd, so what really attracted me to Copilot was the involvement of really slick tech with an app that shows you each exercise, but also uses your Apple Watch to produce really detailed data on your reps, how fast, how high, so that my trainer can give me feedback. Austin can see if I'm not going high enough on my hip thrusts or skipping some reps from the end of my pull-ups. You don't need an Apple Watch at all to use Copilot. but it is even cooler if you do. Exercise is a wonder drug. It improves your mood, cardiovascular health, increases your lifespan, reduces your chance of hundreds of illnesses, and just makes you feel better. It's one of the greatest things you can do for yourself, and even as someone who knows how much it helps, I have still found Copilot invaluable at getting me back in my gym in the garage or on my bike. It's helped me rebuild the healthiest habit I had, which I had let slip before. Going back down, it's 52 now, getting there. And because it's flexible and affordable and personalized, over 75% of Copilot users continue to work out after the first 100 days. So if you too want your own coach to help you reach your fitness goal, click my Copilot link below or use the QR code on screen to get a 14-day completely free trial with your own expert fitness and health coach. And you'll even get to see the rare double tash as Austin and I both rocked some questionable looks. I really wanted to work with Copilot because on top of all the promotion that I give on behalf of Big Exercise, if I can help you get fitter or feel better, even in a very small way, I will truly feel happy for the first time to be referred to as a health influencer. So give it a try. Free.
What's something a poor kid would understand but would utterly confuse a rich kid? Waiting around in a laundromat, the ultimate example of why it's so expensive to be poor. You can't afford the initial capital of buying a washing machine, so you end up spending even more money at a laundromat over time. Watching the rest of the class go on class trips or vacations while you stay at home or at work, or even going to a school that offered this in the first place. I had no idea this was even a thing until I was in my 20s. Every time you get a little bit ahead, an extra $100 or so, and being able to relax and breathe a bit. Next day, something goes catastrophically wrong with the car or an appliance or an unexpected late charge on something you forgot about. It never ends. One step forward, two steps back. The guilt versus gratitude relationship fight you have when your friends share their food with you. Because on one hand, you never have enough money to buy enough food to be fully satiated. So that extra from your friends is awesome. But on the other hand, you understand how awful it is to not have enough food at lunch. And you don't want to put your friends in that position. Going to the library to use the internet. My mom and I often went with the car to the parking lot nearby outside with our crappy laptop to connect to the nearby unsecured Wi-Fi to be able to Skype with my grandma. It happened for about a year till she had enough money to buy a router. New means different, not unused. When you're getting new clothes, they're used from family or a thrift store. My cousins are upper middle class, and I went shopping with them during one of the only times I spent the night at their house. Not only were these 12-year-old girls astounded that my mom only gave me $10 to spend while there, they couldn't at all understand why I was checking the prices on everything we saw. Their parents just bought them whatever they wanted most of the time. My entire identity revolves around food. I use my spare fun money for food now. I give gifts of food. I take friends out to eat. I give people their favorite snacks and candy bars as little surprises. We never had enough as a kid. We went hungry every day, and now I express myself through food. I'll bring friends dinner, I'll bake people's favorites, I'll bring my coworkers entire casseroles. I'll take huge pots of soup to our neighbors. I'm getting emotional right now just thinking about how important the availability of food is to me. I have an 18-year-old coworker that doesn't eat lunch during break for our 12-hour shift, so I started packing twice as much. And I feed her the extra I bring. I just want all my friends and family to be full, to never have to feel hunger like my family did, like I did. I don't want that for them. Paying bills before the age of 18. Getting your paycheck and handing it over to your mom when you get home so the water and electricity stay on that month. Never seeing your gas tank above the midway line. Pushing oil changes until your car starts making strange grumbling noises at you. Wearing the same 2 pairs of shoes until they fall to pieces, and then visiting the thrift store for the next pair. Being freaking ecstatic that tonight mom's buying pizza for delivery because it's your only birthday wish. Don't get me wrong, I had a great childhood. My parents never let us forget that we were loved. So being poor wasn't something we really noticed, except when strangers or people at work and school treated us different for it. Buying food, not for taste or preference, but for the price point and how filling it is. There's food that tastes good because it tastes good, and then there's food that tastes good because of how affordable it is. Sugar sandwiches for dinner. Butter, sugar, and bread. We thought it was like dessert for dinner, but my mom told us recently it was because we didn't have any food. Being really young and getting excited about the power cut and lighting candles and things like that, when really it was because we couldn't afford electricity. Back in high school, I was getting flamed for having cheap shoes from Marshalls. Here's something along the lines of how it went. Those shoes are ugly. I agree. I gotta wait for my next paycheck so I can grab some new ones. Why don't you just ask your parents to buy you shoes? Because they gotta put money in more important places right now. Wait, so your parents don't buy you new shoes? Nah, I gotta save up. Cue extreme look of confusion for the kid. The confusion of the kid when he realized that most parents don't buy their kids everything they want was something I won't forget. In typical high school fashion, he then proceeded to tease me for being broke. Also, explaining to others that the only time I left my home state was for family emergencies was something that they couldn't grasp either. How bad it feels when a non-poor kid, even up to adulthood, mentions doing something expensive casually, or worse, makes a big deal about you never doing it. Things like flying, going to another country, going to Disney World, going to a hibachi restaurant or fancy steakhouse, doing camps or programs that cost money at school or during the summer. You never blank seems so confusing to them that it's true, and never crosses their mind you might feel self-conscious about it. Hint, everyone does. Knowing how to sew as a necessity. I fixed countless shirts and pants, even my couch. Everyone needs to learn this. Putting water in shampoo bottles to make it last longer. No amount of wealth that I've had has ever made me change this habit. I mean, it's just wasteful to not get that extra bit, and is less effort than opening a new bottle. I was a poor kid who was lucky enough to go to a good high school. The downside of that was growing up next to entitled brats. I've seen a girl throw her brand new gold iPhone across the room and not bat an eye because her parents would buy her a new one. Sure enough, the next time I saw her, she had one. These are the same kids that crash the new cars they get for their birthdays, get manicures, facials, and eyelashes every week despite never working a day in their lives. On the other side, I was scared when I ripped the strap off the backpack I'd been using for 4 years. I sewed it up because I didn't want to stress my mom out with having to buy a new one for me. I used it for 2 more years through college until it finally kicked the bucket and I was able to get a new one. Not getting upset when clothes, shoes, or other items are, to them, ruined. If I had a hole in my shoe, or a stain or tear on my clothes, I had to live with it, at least for a while. I knew kids in the middle and upper classes that would get chewed out for stuff like that, but their parents would usually buy them new stuff right away. That wasn't the case for a lot of kids like me because it just wasn't possible. Most of the clothes I owned were hand-me-downs to begin with. Some of it was found in the garbage. Parents borrowing birthday money to help with bills or buying food and toiletries. Love them to death. They've always worked hard for me and my sister. Every term, our school would do a thing called Scholastic Books. It's like a catalog of books and other educational things that parents can go through, pick out what they think their child would like, and order them. The school gets a percentage of the sales and the kids get an education-filled Christmas unboxing every term. Almost every kid in my class would get at least one thing, except me. I was just sitting in the back of the class watching other kids showing off their new stuff to each other. One year, a kid left before the order came in and the teacher gave his book to me. Rich kids will never know the feeling of being poor, having it noticed, and not being shamed for it. It was the only time I ever got a book from Scholastic, and I still have it. Relaxing in an empty parking lot in your friend's car is a typical night out, because nobody has anything at home and don't want to be there anyways because it's too stressful. You can't just live within your means. I think that sometimes when people say this, they're talking about poor people who spend money on alcohol and cigarettes, or that nice car they just had to have but can't really afford. I remember Jamie Oliver was criticized once for saying that a lot of British working class were just drunks who weren't interested in eating proper food, and preferred to spend their money on getting drunk in pubs. That being said, I know it's not that simple. If you haven't been poor, then you don't really understand it. The actual process of looking at something in a store and debating whether or not it's really something they need or is it something they want before trying to see if they can find a cheaper version. Coming to school stinking because your parents couldn't pay utilities that month, as if you chose to be gross. We couldn't afford cable growing up, so ergo, I didn't see a lot of movies. I often get ridiculed as a 35-year-old for not seeing them. And I always get the, how have you not seen these? And now it's at a point where I don't have too much of a desire to see a kid's movie for the first time from 20 years ago. I'm not really complaining, because my mom did a lot to keep my childhood together, but most of my friends don't understand that not having cable cut off access to a lot of the references they remember so fondly. Going to the mall with friends, not buying anything, not trying anything on in case you damage it, not buying any food or snacks, and making excuses why you can't go see the movie with everyone else. Saying you left your phone at home so they don't see the old flip phone or first-gen smartphone you've been passed down, and leaving quickly without saying goodbye to anyone so they don't see your mom pull up in the ancient station wagon your family's had for the last decade. What it's like to eat spaghetti for over a year and a half straight. Other than my birthday, that is exactly what I've done and am doing. I hate it. I hate it so much. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Sorry, I had to have a moment. I stressed myself out. They call it intermittent fasting by not eating breakfast, but that's pretty standard to me how I grew up. Not eating breakfast, lunch, or dinner because there was no food. According to some other people I know, it's a lack of cleanliness. Don't know if that's the right word for it. An ex-neighbor of mine, older lady, requested me specifically to help clean her property and pack her stuff when she was moving. Apparently, she asked for me because she knew I'd understand in regards to the state of her house and the yard. I mean, she was right. My family also had a bit of a white trash redneck kind of property with all the trappings. But it didn't dawn on me that other people also did it. I wouldn't expect anyone who isn't from the country or didn't live on a street in the woods with no streetlights to understand the nuances of the way a redneck yard and house looks and operates. Yes, we have a bug problem, and at least 2 defunct broken cars sitting in the grass. But I promise we're not crazy stereotypes. It's safe, I assure you. I was 7 or 8 and my rich cousin, just a few years older, screamed at me because I didn't know how to put on a seatbelt. Last time I had entered a car, I still needed a baby chair. That the next excursion with the school is too expensive to be able to go and have fun with your friends. I remember I was acting like, that's for kids, I don't go do that, but I wanted to go. I just couldn't. Or being worried about starting the school year without books because they've changed them and they're not like last year's. And you need new books, and they're very expensive. When I was a small and nimble child, my father would slip me into the vents of his client's house to scare the rats out, whereupon my siblings would be waiting to bludgeon them to death with the family soup ladles. We were a whole family of ratters. We lived rats, killed rats, and when times were tough, ate rats too. Driving with the check engine light on all the time. Can't get a new car, can't get it fixed, but have to take it to get to work so you can make rent. Just drive and hope it doesn't stall or blow up. The take a penny, leave a penny honor system. I was a cashier at a gas station for many years. The people taking the change from the take/leave cup have hundreds sticking out of their wallet. The ones who actually need them will stand there checking every pocket and corner of their purse, run out to check under their car seat before accepting the change, and they come back to pay it the next day. How hard life really is, and that money 100% can buy happiness. The whole money can't buy happiness thing is just something the rich tell the poor to keep them placated. Money gets you financial security and products, which in turn makes you happy. Money can certainly buy happiness. Expiration dates are more like suggestions than fact. They have to set them earlier than they actually expect the food to expire so as to avoid complaint. Had a roommate throw out all of my and my other roommate's food because it was a week before the expiration date. She honestly didn't understand why we were livid. She thought she was helping. Learning skills to make do with what you have. I remember not having very much money growing up and needing to learn lots of computer and network related troubleshooting skills because I couldn't rely on my parents simply to buy a new computer or update the modem or router. We couldn't simply pay to have ISP technicians come out all the time, and my parents couldn't afford the time off to address those types of issues. being afraid of going to the doctor or dentist. This isn't stemming from being afraid of needles or getting teeth pulled, but more for a concern of whether or not something that was found would be sufficiently covered by insurance, and weighing that against whether or not you truly feel bad. I remember having a really weak immune system at a certain point when I was 16 years old, and not wanting to go to the doctors until the pain was too unbearable. Turned out that I had shingles. Yes, I'm aware that it's extremely uncommon for someone that young to have, but yes, I did in fact get diagnosed with shingles, and I'm not mistaking it for something else. There was also a time where finals were approaching during my third year in my major, when I was feeling some pain in my abdomen and reading up on my symptoms. I foolishly decided that my self-diagnosis was sufficient and stayed home to tough out what I suspected to be a kidney stone, rather than see a doctor, because I figured that they'd expect me to pass it on my own anyway. I ended up passing the kidney stone halfway through finals week. As someone who grew up in an environment that disincentivized the usage of healthcare, I really have to be mindful to make full use of it now that I'm older, and maintaining my health matters more. It's crazy how much small things matter when you're poor, and how little thought you're able to put into them if you're financially stable. Saving trash. Rich people don't bother with food scraps or the boxes things came in, because why would you store trash in your fridge or closet instead of getting rid of it now? One thing I don't think people understand is that being poor in an urban area sucks, but I'd argue in many ways, being poor in a rural area sucks even more. In my adult life, since I've escaped from the poor forgotten town I grew up in, I've met a lot of other people who grew up poor also. And the ones from larger areas, the story is like, oh, thank God we had things like the local Y or whatever after school tutoring program for poor kids, or teach music in the ghetto type stuff. And it's like, well, we didn't have any of that. You were just dirt poor, and no one knew your town even existed or gives a crap about it. So yeah, that's one thing I've heard from even other former poor kids. They'll ask things like, what community programs did you go to? Or something like that. And I have to explain, hey, we didn't even have that. We were just all poor out in the boonies with nothing around. And even our own state government pretended that part of the state doesn't exist. In the US, in February, you get better stuff than Christmas when the income tax check hits. We'd get new shoes and have cable for a couple of months. Even McDonald's. You don't ever get ice in your fast food drinks. You get less soda, and you don't need your drink to stay cold if you drink it fast, since they keep it cold in the fountain dispenser. Cooking everything, including pizza, from scratch, because restaurants and pre-made food are too expensive. On the rare occasion food was purchased from a restaurant, it was either because my father was out of town, or we were buying the leftover cold chicken, not the freshly cooked hot chicken from the local chicken shack. Group daycare. All of the poorer kids in my elementary school all went to the same group daycare when they were preschool. Kids with richer parents either had a stay-at-home parent or had their own personal babysitter. Fruit juice, even the fake kind, is a luxury. Boxed mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs baked into it is a fine casserole. Salvation Army sells prom dresses that are in great shape. Duct tape on shoes isn't just a fashion statement, it's a necessity. Space heaters are for when your gas utility gets cut off and all the windows are open because the electricity got cut off and we need the light in the house. There are more, but that's a pretty comprehensive list from me. Navigating higher education when your parents didn't go to college. So much of your success in college is based on your ability to utilize on-campus resources, and meeting with faculty and staff about opportunities and for assistance. That all wasn't totally obvious to me, and I feel like it really inhibited my success in school. I remember having to turn down an offer for an internship in DC because it was unpaid, and I didn't know there was an office at school that would help find funding to live there. Getting the financial aid office and the financial service office confused on a regular basis and feeling super stupid because of it is also a fond memory. Doing all your own work on your house and learning how to do all this work on your own. Bathroom leak? Dad needs to learn how to do basic plumbing. Need to do some basic wiring? Dad needs to learn basic electrical. Need to add a new addition to the house? Dad learns basic carpentry. Need the roof reshingled? Dad learns how to reshingle a roof. Broken window? Dad learns how to install new glass or replace an entire window. By the time I was 12, I was learning how to do carpentry, mechanics, wiring, plumbing, construction, landscaping, metalwork, welding, building, renovations, and repairing. I learned how to drive a truck at 13, tractor at 14, and heavy equipment at 18. By the time I was 20, I could fix and maintain anything in my own house. By the time I was 30, I could literally build an entire house and everything that goes with it on my own. I wasn't the best, the fastest, or the most efficient, but I could do just about anything with my own hands. I grew up in a remote native community where we had no easy access to construction workers, plumbing, electricians, or mechanics. We had to learn how to do all these things on our own. It's amazing what you can learn to do when you're forced to. Getting excited about being able to have McDonald's. We used to be so poor, my two sisters and I were practically giddy that we were able to share 2 Happy Meals between us 3 and my mom. Otherwise, it was soup kitchen and discount food. Coupons. I have a friend that's really rich and I love this show that's all about couponing, and she asked what a coupon was. I was shocked. Watching your mom push food away to you or your dad, even though she was still hungry. Also, your parents sacrificing their health for yours. We didn't have low-income healthcare, and while I always got proper medical care, my parents did without. I grew up in communism, and let me tell you, Romania in the 1980s would confuse most of you. Hot water stopped running after 9 p.m. No hot water between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. the next day. Hot water between 6 to 8 a.m. and 3 to 9 p.m. on most days except Saturday and Sunday. We did not have 2 days off every weekend. We went to school Monday through Saturday. Every second day, I would wake up at 5:45 and be in line at a shop about 500 miles away from my house to buy milk. The queue would be variable, but some days the milk would finish before I got a chance to buy it. Shops did not have milk, butter, fresh bread, or any of the basics. At random times in the evening, electricity would turn itself off, and sometimes it stayed off for hours. This was part of our dictator's plan to save energy. It got so bad that as a med student, because I had to study for exams and refused to do it by candlelight, I made a chart with times and regions where electricity was cut for about a month. Then I would make sure not to be in that neighborhood when electricity was expected to be cut. So I ended up visiting people who had electricity so I could study. Luckily, they understood and left me alone. I saw a banana for the first time at age 23. I sat in line for 4 hours to buy oranges outdoors in freezing temperatures. To enter the US Embassy in Romania in 1992, I had to line up for 18 hours. Need I continue? When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
I'm sure you've heard by now that Amazon Prime just released a new 4-part docuseries called LuLaRich. The series chronicles the dramatic rise and equally dramatic fall of an MLM company called LuLaRoe, otherwise known as that god-awful leggings company. As a quick refresher, MLM stands for multi-level marketing. It is a type of business structure that utilizes a non-salaried sales force. This sales force is compensated either by earning commissions off of the products they sell to customers or through recruiting others into the company under them and earning a percentage off of the sales and purchases of their recruits. MLMs are often compared to pyramid schemes because it's been demonstrated that more money is made through the recruitment of others into the MLM than from actual product sales to outside customers. If you want to know more about MLMs, my entire channel is dedicated to exposing these schemes, and I have plenty of content that goes more in depth on how MLMs operate, how they lure people in, and how they harm those involved. LuLaRich has received rave reviews, despite LuLaRoe reps' best efforts to sink the docuseries ratings. They swarmed the series with 1-star reviews shortly after it premiered in early September. However, much to current reps' dismay, the series earned itself a 5-star rating and is one of the most streamed shows on Prime right now. The documentary team interviewed LuLaRoe founders Deanne and Mark Stidham, a Mormon couple that, unsurprisingly, had previous ties to the oldest and largest MLM company around, Amway.
My parents were Amway distributors in the 60s.
Have you ever been involved in multi-level marketing?
Yes.
What multi-level marketing?
I tried to do Amway.
In my opinion, both Mark and Deanne have personalities that, especially when combined, naturally lend themselves to the con man role. Mark, who runs more of the operational side of the company, has this way of watering down the truth to make it more palatable. At one point during the series, he claims that LuLaRoe isn't really multi-level marketing and that he likes to call it mid-level management, even though LuLaRoe possesses every single trait that fits the definition of an MLM. In my opinion, it was a not so subtle attempt at distancing his company from an industry with a bad reputation. Deanne, who in the documentary recounts how she started LuLaRoe by selling maxi skirts out of the trunk of her car, feigns a bubbly, albeit slightly ditzy personality while being interviewed by the documentary crew. Actually, one of the big things that stood out to me while watching LuLaRich was just how different Deanne acted while being interviewed versus how she acted in the court footage they featured from when LuLaRoe was being sued by the Washington State Office of Attorney General. In the court footage, she came off very lackluster. She seemed to almost not take it seriously. I mean, she was being deposed, which would put anyone in a bad mood, but it went beyond that. Her personality was completely different. While being interviewed for the doc, both she and Mark presented LuLaRoe as Deanne's passion project. They tried to frame her as the ultimate girl boss of all girl bosses. But then in the court footage, she's asked for the address of LuLaRoe headquarters, which she answers with, "I don't know."
What's the address of the building? I don't know.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever heard of a boss who doesn't know the address of their own company's headquarters. I think this just goes to show how much of an act a lot of this MLM stuff is. It's all smoke and mirrors. Enthusiasm and excitement is really played up in order to lure unsuspecting people into a losing game. The doc also featured the stories of many LuLaRoe consultants, most of whom had left or been terminated. Many of them recounted the struggles they faced being involved with a company that grew far too big for its britches. The thing with MLMs or product-based pyramid schemes is that they're always destined for collapse. When your company is only sustained by the constant influx of new recruits, there's only so long you can go before there just isn't anyone left to recruit. What was different with LuLaRoe, though, is that it grew in popularity far faster than most MLMs. The company was only founded back in 2012, but by 2017, they had more than 80,000 distributors. This unprecedented growth really allowed us to watch an MLM collapse in on itself in real time. What made LuLaRoe's collapse even more terrifying was all the insider information that came out about the company as reps started leaving. And LuLaRich really did a great job at documenting all of this tea spilling. As a viewer, I was left with the feeling that even for an MLM company, LuLaRoe reached new levels of insanity. So in an effort to keep new people from joining this truly awful company, I have compiled a list of the 5 most terrifying things that I learned about LuLaRoe from watching the LuLaRich documentary. Recruits were asked to sell their breast milk. One of the defining features of an MLM is that you have to pay in order to join. Most companies require new distributors to purchase a starter kit that includes some of their more popular products, along with training materials on how to build your business. A typical starter kit is around $100. However, many companies offer multiple starter kits, all at different price points, and often new recruits are pressured into buying the more expensive kits because they're told that investing more initially will increase their rate of success long term. Of course, MLMs make a big chunk of their money off of selling these kits to their own distributors, and the more expensive a kit is, the more money the MLM makes. LuLaRoe took things to a whole new level. At their peak, they had some of the most expensive starter kits in the MLM world. In order to join, a new rep would have to buy a starter kit that ranged anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. That's a really large investment for most people, and a lot of people just simply don't have the money on hand to invest in the first place. So in order to get people to join, high-ranking consultants in LuLaRoe started encouraging new recruits to open up credit cards, borrow money from family, or even sell their own breast milk in order to pay for the starter kit.
And she found out that she could supply some of her breast milk and sell it to the NICU units to help those infants that are in the NICUs, and people pay for that. And she's been doing some of that to save some money to get her initial kit. And she's so excited to start LuLaRoe and do it without getting into debt and yet helping some other people and these babies as she is getting into her business.
So she's paid $4,500 so far from selling her breast milk into the hospital NICUs. And I was just like, I was blown away. She is so excited. When we came out of there, she talked to us at first, and she came back over and started talking to us, and her excitement for what LuLaRoe can offer her is just, it's contagious, I gotta tell you.
She said, I cannot wait to get my business started because I know that LuLaRoe will provide me the way to be home with my children and not have to work these crazy shifts at the restaurant.
Now, I don't think that there's anything wrong with selling your breast milk if you're in a pinch and really need some cash, but being encouraged to sell your breast milk so you can join a pyramid scheme is a whole different story. Since LuLaRoe has been in rapid decline the last few years, they've dropped the price of their starter kit significantly. It now only costs $499 to join.
$4.99? Are you out of your mind? That's how I feel about this deal. Like, are you out of your mind? Are you insane? You must be crazy. Because if you had told me that I could have signed up 5 years ago for $4.99, yeah, there would have been no question in my mind, you know? There was a little bit of hesitation when it was $6,000, right? I mean, that's a little bit more of an investment going into it, wouldn't you say?
Almost $500 is still a lot of money. And although I hope that people aren't still selling their breast milk in order to join, I wouldn't be surprised if that's still happening. Mark and Deanne's family control everything. As I previously mentioned, LuLaRoe founders Mark and Deanne are Mormons. Family is extremely important in the Mormon faith, and they believe that one of their main responsibilities here on earth is to be fruitful and multiply. In other words, they have a lot of kids. Mark and Deanne have 14 children, 3 of whom were adopted. 2 of their children actually ended up getting married to each other, which Mark and Deanne are shown laughing about in the first episode of LuLaRich.
So out of our 14 children, 2 of them are married to each other. So it's like...
They do go on to explain that one of the kids was adopted and that neither of them lived in the house together growing up, but it's still a bit strange in my opinion. When LuLaRoe first started taking off, Mark and Deanne basically offered their children first dibs in the company. Many of them ended up being hired into executive positions, whether they were qualified for these positions or not. So yeah, nepotism kind of runs rampant in LuLaRoe. In the doc, Deanne's son, Kenny Brady, who became vice president of sales, is shown basically having a meltdown while recounting the story of Mark and Deanne asking him to join the company.
They asked for our help.
Kenny goes on to say, while continuing to tear up, that Mark and Deanne don't care about having LuLaRoe for themselves, and that they really care more about helping their children and other families who join. I found that rather hard to believe, considering both Mark and Deanne live an extremely lavish lifestyle off the money they've made from LuLaRoe. Deanne regularly goes on shopping sprees for Louis Vuitton purses, and Mark drives around million-dollar luxury Koenigsegg cars. But yeah, they really just care about helping others and blessing lives. Sam Schultz, who is Deanne's nephew, was hired on as events coordinator. Sam is a pretty high energy person, and he actually put on a lot of really good events for LuLaRoe. He even hired Katy Perry to perform at their 2017 convention. In the doc, Sam claimed that Deanne actually had a problem with Katy Perry performing because she has a song titled I Kissed a Girl. Surprise, surprise, the Mormons who started a pyramid scheme are also homophobic. Although Sam is an open critic of LuLaRoe, even calling it a pyramid scheme in the documentary, he's not so innocent himself. He reportedly was terminated from the company after it was found out that he had inappropriate relationships with multiple consultants. Then, after leaving LuLaRoe, Sam tried to recruit former reps into a marijuana business that ended up being a Ponzi scheme. He even sent a picture of $30,000 in cash that he had supposedly invested into the business to a woman named Courtney Harwood, who was a former consultant that was featured in LuLaRich. Courtney told the film crew that she reverse image searched the picture Sam had sent her and found out that he had actually copied the picture from Google Images and was trying to pass it off as a picture he took himself of his own money. There were several other family members that were also given positions at the company, including Deanne's son Jordan, who became the head of leadership and cultural development, Deanne's son-in-law Jeff, who became vice president of finance, Deanne's daughter Amelia, who became LuLaRoe's photographer, as well as many others. Something that wasn't mentioned in LuLaRich, but I think is still really important to know, is that the few family members that didn't end up working for LuLaRoe still followed in Deanne and Mark's shoes by starting their own pyramid schemes. Deanne's sister, Diane, who actually helped out with the maxi skirt business in the early days, started her own MLM company called Honey and Lace that was a direct competitor of LuLaRoe. She ended up selling the company, and it was eventually renamed to Savvy. Deanne's daughter, Nicole, started an MLM called Smile that sells children's clothing, and Deanne's niece, Buffy, started an MLM called Agnes and Dora that sold women's clothing. Smile is still operational, but Agnes and Dora appears to be defunct. Basically, Deanne and Mark's family, or most of them anyway, are the MLM mafia. The family has quickly grown their fortune by participating in several unethical and borderline illegal business dealings. LuLaRoe artists were stealing from other designers. LuLaRoe uses a marketing tactic known as FOMO, or fear of missing out. They have standard cuts of their clothing, but they're constantly rotating the prints. For every new print their artists design, they only produce 3,000 articles of clothing with that specific print. It's honestly a genius marketing strategy. If a customer sees a print that they like and it happens to be in their size, they're kind of forced into buying it immediately because they'll probably never see that exact item available ever again. During LuLaRoe's heyday, this put immense pressure on their designers. The doc team interviewed former LuLaRoe designer Eliana Estarelas, who said at one point designers were required to make 100 new prints every single day.
But yeah, I was making art with a gun against my head.
The unrealistic quotas caused some artists to start cutting corners. The clothes gradually got uglier and uglier, and sometimes the patterns would be poorly placed on the leggings and would resemble certain body parts, if you catch my drift. LuLaRoe designers also started taking from other artists' work, making a few changes, and then passing it off as their own. They were told that in order to avoid copyright infringement, that they would need to alter the design by at least 20%. But because the demand for new prints was so high, designers would sometimes just straight up steal from other artists' work. In at least one case, a LuLaRoe designer stole art and actually forgot to remove the artist's watermark from the pattern. Obviously, the designers shouldn't have been stealing from other people's work, but personally, I place most of the blame on the company itself for placing such unrealistic expectations on their employees. The overall quality of the clothing suffered as well. Many customers received clothing that would fall apart after one use or that already had holes in it.
These are the leggings I got. This is the first pair I got. Now I did get another pair, which we'll talk about separately. So the first thing that I loved is that, I don't know if you can see it, but my leggings came complete with holes there, and just across the butt in general. This is because it's made with really cheap fabric. So I was like, oh great, so complete with holes. I didn't know they made distressed leggings like they made distressed jeans now. So then I started looking at the leggings themselves. Look at how it's sewn together. Who the hell did the seaming? Like seriously, this is the worst seaming on a product ever. Like yeah, I want a giant unshapen triangle mass on my vagina.
On top of all of this, LuLaRoe was producing so much inventory that they had nowhere in their warehouse to store it. So they actually started storing clothes in huge bins or cages outside in their parking lot, where the clothing would be exposed to the elements. Consultants then started getting inventory that had been completely soaked with rain, or was moldy and smelled terrible, or had spots where it had been sun bleached. LuLaRoe wants women to be submissive. The MLM industry is filled with companies that co-opt pop feminist language in order to lure women into their schemes. They especially target stay-at-home moms who are looking for flexible work. LuLaRoe is no exception to this trend. They use the cheap language of feminism, throwing around words like empowerment and girl boss. They claim to be the way for women to be entrepreneurs and build successful businesses, all while being able to still prioritize time with their family and kids. They claim to be in the business of elevating women's voices in the entrepreneurial sphere. The truth is, though, all of their talk of female empowerment is simply a marketing tool. In reality, LuLaRoe promotes an extremely regressive image of gender roles. This couldn't have been any better exemplified than when the LuLaRich crew asked Deanne what inspired her to empower women, to which Mark interrupted the interview and answered the question for her.
What inspired the empowerment of women for you?
Can I jump in there and then you can talk?
Yeah, because,
Yeah, I have something to...
Tiffany Ivanovsky, a former consultant who was interviewed for the doc, said that Deanne and Mark basically ignored her and referred to her LuLaRoe business as her husband Paul's business, even though she did 90% of the work. Tiffany and Roberta Blevins, another top consultant interviewed for the